I'm Sarah, I'm 29 years old, and I thought I knew what unconditional family love looked like until the day I walked across that graduation stage to receive my master's degree in biomedical engineering from Stanford, looked out into the audience, and saw two empty seats where my parents should have been. They were at my brother Jake's baseball game instead, again. But what happened next would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my worth, and what I was willing to accept in the name of love. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt like the invisible child in your own family, please stay with me. Because what I discovered about my parents' true feelings and how I finally found my voice might just help you find yours too. Growing up, I always thought our family was normal. Dad worked as a regional sales manager, Mom was a part-time nurse, and we lived in a comfortable suburban house in Ohio. Jake is 3 years younger than me, and from the time he could hold a bat, our entire family universe revolved around his athletic potential. I remember being 7 years old, sitting in my bedroom doing homework, hearing Mom and Dad in the kitchen talking about Jake's Little League tryouts. The excitement in their voices was palpable. They discussed his batting stance, his throwing arm, his speed around the bases like they were analyzing a future Hall of Famer. When I walked into the kitchen to show them the A+ I'd gotten on my science project about the solar system, complete with a hand-painted model that took me weeks to perfect, Dad glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds before turning back to Mom to continue their conversation about Jake's uniform fitting. That became the pattern. Jake's games, Jake's tournaments, Jake's batting averages, Jake's scholarship possibilities, every Friday night dinner conversation, every weekend plan, every family vacation was scheduled around Jake's baseball calendar. We drove 8 hours to Cooperstown for a tournament when Jake was 12. We spent every summer weekend at different ballparks across 3 states. My parents bought a premium camera to record every at-bat, every catch, every stolen base. Meanwhile, I was quietly becoming the kid who excelled at everything academic. I made honor roll every semester from middle school through high school. I won the regional science fair 3 years in a row. I was accepted into the National Honor Society, became president of the debate team, and scored in the 98th percentile on my SATs. But none of these achievements ever generated the same enthusiasm that Jake's RBI statistics did. I told myself it didn't matter. I convinced myself that my parents loved us equally. They just expressed it differently. Jake was the athlete, I was the scholar. We had different strengths, different paths. That's what I told myself every time I sat alone in the audience at academic awards ceremonies, scanning the crowd for my parents who were usually at one of Jake's games. The pattern became more obvious in high school. My parents attended every single one of Jake's baseball games, home and away. They knew his batting average down to the 3rd decimal point. They could recite his ERA, his stolen base percentage, his fielding statistics like gospel. They bought season tickets to the local minor league team to help Jake study professional techniques. They hired a private batting coach who charged $150 per session, twice a week for 2 years. When I made varsity debate team as a sophomore and we went to state championships, I asked if they could come watch. Mom said they wanted to, they really did, but Jake had a tournament that same weekend. A tournament that would last all day Saturday and Sunday, which meant they couldn't even come to my Friday evening preliminary rounds. I competed in state debate championships and won 2nd place in extemporaneous speaking. I stood on that stage, holding my medal, looking out at an audience full of proud parents cheering for their kids, and mine weren't there. I drove myself home that night, walked into the kitchen where Mom and Dad were reviewing Jake's game footage from the weekend, and when I showed them my medal, Dad said that was great, honey, and immediately turned back to the screen to analyze Jake's swing mechanics. College applications revealed the full extent of the disparity. Jake was a solid high school player, good enough to get some interest from Division II schools, but nothing spectacular. Meanwhile, I had perfect grades, stellar test scores, and was being recruited by some of the top engineering programs in the country. When I got my acceptance letter to Stanford with a partial academic scholarship, I ran into the kitchen practically vibrating with excitement. Mom was on the phone with a college baseball scout who had called about Jake. She held up one finger to indicate I should wait, spent 20 minutes discussing Jake's statistics and tournament schedule, and when she finally hung up, I told her about Stanford. She said that was wonderful, sweetie, but did I realize how expensive Stanford was going to be? Had I thought about maybe staying closer to home, somewhere more affordable? Jake, meanwhile, was being actively courted by 3 different state schools, and every conversation was about which program would be the best fit for his development, which coaches had the best track record of developing players, which facilities would give him the best chance to succeed. Money was never mentioned as a barrier for Jake's college choices. The summer before my freshman year at Stanford, our family dynamic reached a new level of absurdity. I was working 2 jobs to save money for college expenses while studying advanced calculus to prepare for my engineering coursework. Jake was playing summer league baseball, and my parents arranged their entire schedule around his games. They bought a travel trailer so they could camp at tournament sites. They joined booster clubs. They organized team fundraisers. When I asked if they could help me move into my dorm at Stanford, Dad said it was really bad timing because Jake had regionals that weekend. Mom suggested I could fly out by myself and they'd help me get settled during Parents' Weekend in October. Jake's regionals, by the way, were for a summer recreational league, not even his school team. I moved myself into Stanford. I loaded my car with everything I owned, drove 22 hours across the country alone, carried my belongings up 3 flights of stairs to my dorm room, and called home that night to tell them I'd arrived safely. Mom asked how the drive was, told me to be careful and make good choices, and then spent the next 15 minutes updating me on Jake's performance in regionals. College was where I truly began to flourish. I discovered I had a real passion for biomedical engineering, specifically developing prosthetic devices for pediatric patients. I maintained a 3.9 GPA while working in research labs and volunteering at children's hospitals. I published my first research paper as a sophomore. I was awarded a prestigious summer internship at a medical device company in Boston. I was invited to present my research at national conferences. My parents' level of interest in these achievements remained consistently minimal. When I called to tell them about my research being published, Dad was proud, sure, but did I know Jake had been named to the all-conference team? When I got the internship in Boston, Mom worried about me being so far from home in a big city, but had I seen the article in the local paper about Jake's batting title? Jake, for his part, was having a perfectly respectable college baseball career. He played regularly for his Division II school, maintained decent grades, and was generally a good kid. This isn't about Jake being a bad person or undeserving of support. This is about the wildly disproportionate level of attention, resources, and emotional investment my parents made in his pursuits versus mine. The breaking point came during my final semester at Stanford. I was completing my master's degree in biomedical engineering, graduating summa cum laude, and had already accepted a position with a leading medical device company in California, starting at $89,000 per year. At 24 years old, I was about to become the first person in our family to earn an advanced degree and the highest earner by a significant margin. Graduation was scheduled for Saturday, June 8th at 2 p.m. I called my parents in February to give them plenty of notice. I told them how important this was to me, how much it would mean to have them there. Mom said they were so proud of me and wouldn't miss it for the world. Dad said he was looking forward to seeing Stanford's campus and meeting my professors. In April, I got a text message from Mom. Jake's team had made it to the conference championship tournament, and it was the same weekend as my graduation. She asked if there was any way I could get the specific time of my ceremony, because they wanted to see if they could possibly do both. I sent her the entire graduation schedule. Ceremony began at 2 p.m. Pacific time, which was 5 p.m. their time. Jake's game was at 7 p.m. Eastern time. If they flew out Friday night, they could attend my graduation, fly back Saturday evening, and still make it to Jake's game with time to spare. I even offered to pay for their flights. Mom said they needed to think about it. The tournament was really important for Jake's confidence. These scouts would be there. This could be his last chance to impress coaches for a potential transfer to a Division I program. I pointed out that I was receiving the Outstanding Graduate Student Award in my department. I was graduating with the highest honors. I had job offers from 3 different companies. This was the culmination of 6 years of academic excellence. Dad called me that evening and explained that they had decided to stay for Jake's tournament. He said I would understand when I had kids of my own, that sometimes you have to prioritize the child who needs you most at that moment. Jake was really nervous about the championship game, and having his parents there could make all the difference for his performance and his future. I asked, what about my future? What about my performance over the last 6 years? What about all the times I had needed them and they had chosen Jake's baseball instead? Dad said that was different. I was always so independent, so self-sufficient. I never seemed to need their support the way Jake did. I was going to be fine no matter what, but Jake's confidence was more fragile. That conversation revealed everything. I wasn't getting less support because Jake needed more. I was getting less support because my successes made them comfortable neglecting me. My independence was being used as justification for their absence. My strength was being weaponized against my own needs. Graduation day arrived. I put on my cap and gown, walked across that stage, received my diploma and my department award, and smiled for the official photographer while scanning the audience for my parents who weren't there. After the ceremony, I watched classmates celebrating with their families, taking pictures, going to dinner, while I sat alone in my car in the parking lot and cried. I called home that evening. Mom answered and immediately started talking about how amazing Jake's game had been. He had gone 3 for 4 with 2 RBIs. The team won the championship. There were scouts there who seemed really interested. It was the best game he'd ever played. I interrupted and asked if she wanted to know how my graduation went. There was a pause, and then Mom said of course she did. She was so sorry she missed it, but she was sure it was wonderful, and she was so proud of me. I told her about the award, about my professor's comments, about the job offer I had accepted. She listened politely and said that was all very nice, and then continued updating me on the post-game celebration and Jake's scholarship prospects. That night, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my relationship with my family forever. I was done accepting crumbs. I was done making excuses for their choices. I was done pretending that their systematic prioritization of Jake over me was somehow normal or justified. I started paying attention to patterns I had previously ignored. I began documenting the disparities not out of pettiness, but out of a need to understand if what I was experiencing was real or if I was being overly sensitive like Dad had suggested. The financial investment was staggering when I actually calculated it. Between private coaching, equipment, travel expenses, tournament fees, and training camps, my parents had spent approximately $47,000 on Jake's baseball career from age 8 through college. They had spent maybe $3,000 total on my academic pursuits over the same time period, and most of that was required school supplies. Jake's bedroom walls were covered with trophies, medals, and newspaper clippings from his athletic achievements. My academic awards were stored in a box in my old closet because Mom said hanging them up would make Jake feel bad about himself. My parents had attended an estimated 300 of Jake's baseball games over 12 years. They had attended fewer than 10 of my academic competitions, presentations, or award ceremonies in that same time period. When I moved to California for my new job, Mom suggested I think about moving back home after a year or two because California was so expensive and I'd be so far from family. When Jake got drafted by a minor league team in Alabama and moved 8 states away to pursue a baseball career that paid $15,000 per year, Dad said they were so proud of him for chasing his dreams and they'd support him no matter what. The double standard was so blatant it would have been almost laughable if it weren't so devastating. My new life in California was everything I had hoped for and more. I was working on cutting-edge prosthetic technology that could genuinely change kids' lives. I was making excellent money, living in a beautiful apartment, and building meaningful friendships with colleagues who shared my passions. I was finally in an environment where my achievements were recognized and valued. For the first time in my life, I was experiencing what it felt like to have your successes celebrated rather than minimized. When I published my second research paper, my entire team took me out to dinner. When I was promoted to senior engineer after 8 months, my boss personally called to congratulate me. When I won an innovation award from our industry association, it was announced in the company newsletter, and I received congratulations from dozens of colleagues. This was the vindication I hadn't even realized I was craving. Not the external recognition itself, but the feeling of being seen, valued, and appreciated for my actual contributions and capabilities. Meanwhile, Jake's minor league career was struggling. He was batting .234 in single-A ball, had been benched multiple times for performance issues, and was beginning to realize that his professional baseball dreams might not materialize. My parents were devastated. Every phone call home involved updates on Jake's struggles, his confidence issues, his uncertain future. During one of these conversations, Dad mentioned that Jake was thinking about going back to college to finish his degree and maybe get into coaching. He said they were worried about how Jake would pay for college since his baseball scholarship had only covered 2 years, and he'd left school to pursue the minor league opportunity. I listened to this concern and realized my father was worried about Jake having to pay for his own education, something I had been doing since my sophomore year of college through work-study programs, internships, and student loans. That's when I decided it was time for a conversation I had been avoiding for months. I flew home for Christmas that year with a specific agenda. I was going to address the elephant in the room that our family had been ignoring for decades. I was going to speak my truth, not out of anger or resentment, but out of a genuine desire to either repair our relationship or establish clear boundaries around what I was willing to accept going forward. Christmas morning, after presents were opened and Jake had left to visit his girlfriend's family, I sat down with my parents in the living room and told them I needed to talk to them about something important. I started by acknowledging that I understood they loved both Jake and me, and that they had done their best as parents within their understanding of what that meant. I told them I wasn't trying to attack them or make them feel guilty, but that there were patterns in our family dynamic that had become impossible for me to ignore. I explained how it felt to grow up watching them attend every single one of Jake's games while missing my most important academic achievements. I described the impact of having my successes consistently minimized or overshadowed by Jake's athletic pursuits. I outlined the financial disparities, the time investment differences, and the emotional energy that had been allocated so unevenly between their two children. Mom's initial response was defensive. She said they had always been proud of me, that I was being unfair, that Jake needed more support because athletics were more demanding and time-sensitive than academics. She said I was successful now, so obviously their parenting had worked out fine for me. Dad said I was being overly sensitive and dwelling on the past, instead of appreciating what they had provided for both of us. He said every family was different, and that I couldn't expect them to treat two completely different children in exactly the same way. I had anticipated these responses because they were the same dismissive patterns I had experienced my entire life, so I came prepared with specific examples and a clear framework for what I was actually requesting. I told them that moving forward, I needed them to acknowledge that their treatment of Jake and me had been fundamentally unequal, and that this inequality had been painful and damaging for me. I explained that I wasn't asking them to apologize for their past choices, but I was asking them to recognize the impact those choices had on our relationship. I told them that if they wanted to continue having a meaningful relationship with me, they needed to demonstrate that they valued my achievements and my presence in their lives through their actions, not just their words. I gave them specific examples of what this would look like: attending important events in my life when possible, expressing genuine interest in my work and my goals, and making an effort to balance conversations about Jake with conversations about me. Dad said I was being ridiculous and making demands like a spoiled child. He said family relationships shouldn't be transactional, and that I should love and respect my parents unconditionally regardless of whether they met my expectations. That response clarified everything I needed to know. I told them that unconditional love was exactly what I had been offering them for 27 years, and what I had been hoping to receive in return. I explained that setting boundaries around respectful treatment wasn't being transactional, it was being healthy. I said that I would always love them, but that I was no longer willing to accept a relationship where my needs, feelings, and achievements were consistently considered less important than Jake's. Mom started crying and said I was breaking up the family over something that happened years ago. She said I was being cruel and unfair to Jake, who had nothing to do with their parenting decisions. I clarified that this had nothing to do with Jake, who I loved and would continue to have a relationship with regardless of how things went with them. This was about my relationship with my parents, and my need for that relationship to be based on mutual respect and genuine care. The conversation ended with Dad telling me I could take my ultimatums and demands elsewhere, and that when I was ready to act like an adult and stop playing victim, I was welcome to call them. I flew back to California that night and didn't speak to my parents for 4 months. During those 4 months, my life continued to flourish in ways that reinforced my decision to prioritize my own well-being. I was promoted again at work, this time to lead engineer on a groundbreaking project developing neural interface technology for prosthetic limbs. I was invited to speak at the International Conference on Biomedical Engineering. I was featured in a magazine article about young innovators in medical technology. More importantly, I began therapy to process the family dynamics I had finally acknowledged and named. My therapist helped me understand that what I had experienced was a form of emotional neglect, and that my parents' consistent prioritization of Jake's needs over mine had created lasting patterns of self-doubt and people-pleasing behavior that extended far beyond my family relationships. Through therapy, I learned that my worth was not contingent on other people's recognition or approval. I discovered that I had been seeking validation from my parents not because I needed their approval to succeed, but because their approval would have confirmed that I was valuable and worthy of love. The breakthrough came when I realized that I had already proven my worth through my achievements, my character, and my contributions to the world. My parents' inability to see or acknowledge that worth was a reflection of their limitations, not mine. Jake called me in April. His minor league career had ended, and he was moving back home to finish college and figure out his next steps. He said Mom and Dad had been really upset since our Christmas conversation, and he asked if I could consider working things out with them. I told Jake that I loved him and supported his transition back to civilian life, but that my relationship with our parents was separate from my relationship with him. I explained some of what I had shared with them at Christmas, not to put him in the middle, but to help him understand that my boundaries with them weren't arbitrary or vindictive. Jake said he had always known that Mom and Dad focused more on his stuff than mine, but he hadn't realized how much it had affected me. He said he felt guilty about all the attention and resources they had invested in his baseball career, especially now that it hadn't led anywhere. I assured him that I didn't blame him for our parents' choices, and that his baseball career had value regardless of whether it led to professional success. I told him I was proud of him for having the courage to pursue his dreams, and that I hoped he was proud of me for pursuing mine. That conversation with Jake helped me realize that my decision to establish boundaries with my parents was already having positive effects. Jake and I were able to have an honest, supportive relationship for the first time in years because I was no longer carrying resentment about our parents' treatment of us. In June, exactly 1 year after my graduation from Stanford, I received a phone call that would change everything. Mom called to tell me that Dad had been diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer. The prognosis was good, but he would need surgery and several months of treatment. She said they had been talking a lot about family and priorities, and they realized they owed me an apology. I flew home the next weekend, not because I was ready to reconcile, but because my father had cancer, and that superseded our relationship conflicts. When I walked into their living room, the first thing I noticed was a framed copy of the magazine article about my work displayed prominently on the coffee table. The second thing I noticed was that Jake's trophies had been moved to his old bedroom, and the living room now featured family photos that included pictures from my college graduation that I had sent them but never thought they had displayed. Dad looked older and more fragile than I remembered. The cancer diagnosis had clearly forced him to confront his mortality and priorities in ways that our Christmas conversation hadn't. He started talking before I even sat down. He said that facing cancer had made him think about what really mattered, and that he was ashamed of how he had treated me over the years. He said he had read the magazine article about my work at least a dozen times, and that he finally understood what an incredible person I had become despite his failure to support me properly. Mom said they had spent months talking about our conversation at Christmas, and that they had initially been angry and defensive, but eventually began to recognize the truth in what I had shared with them. She said she had always told herself that I was so capable and independent that I didn't need the same level of support that Jake did, but she realized that was an excuse she had used to justify paying less attention to my needs. Dad said that he was proud of Jake and always would be, but that he was in awe of what I had accomplished and ashamed that he had never properly acknowledged my achievements. He said he had been so focused on Jake's struggles and insecurities that he had taken my strength and success for granted. This was the acknowledgement I had been seeking my entire life, but it was coming at a moment when I no longer needed it for my own sense of worth. I told them that I appreciated their words and that I could see they were making an effort to understand my perspective. I said that I was glad Dad's prognosis was good and that I wanted to support them through his treatment. I also told them that rebuilding our relationship would take time and consistent effort, not just words. I explained that I had learned to value myself independently of their approval, which meant that our relationship going forward would need to be based on genuine mutual respect rather than my need for validation. Over the following months, as Dad went through treatment, my parents made unprecedented efforts to demonstrate their interest in my life and work. They asked detailed questions about my projects. They sent me articles about biomedical engineering advances they thought I might find interesting. They attended a virtual presentation I gave at a conference, something they had never done before. Most importantly, they stopped making every conversation about Jake's struggles and started asking about my goals, my relationships, and my happiness. Dad's surgery was successful, and his recovery gave us opportunities for honest conversations about our family history. He admitted that he had always been more comfortable supporting Jake because Jake's needs were obvious and concrete, while my capabilities had intimidated him. He said he hadn't known how to parent a child who was already succeeding at everything, so he had focused his energy on the child who seemed to need more help. I told him that every child needs encouragement and recognition, regardless of their natural abilities. I explained that his absence from my achievements had sent the message that my successes weren't important or worthy of celebration. Mom acknowledged that she had been guilty of the same pattern, and that she had used my independence as an excuse to give me less attention, rather than recognizing that my independence was partly a response to receiving less attention. These conversations were painful but necessary. They allowed me to finally receive the acknowledgement I had needed, while also helping my parents understand the impact of their choices. By Christmas of that year, our family dynamic had shifted dramatically. Dad was cancer-free and had returned to full health. Jake was back in college, studying sports management and working part-time as an assistant coach for a local high school team. He seemed happier and more grounded than he had been during his professional baseball pursuit. I had been promoted to senior lead engineer and was heading a team developing the next generation of pediatric prosthetics. I had also started dating a fellow engineer who shared my passion for using technology to solve real-world problems. Christmas dinner that year included genuine interest in everyone's lives and achievements. My parents asked thoughtful questions about my work and my relationship. They celebrated Jake's academic progress and his discovery of a career path that utilized his athletic background in a sustainable way. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was a fully seen and valued member of my family. The transformation wasn't complete or perfect. Decades of ingrained patterns don't disappear overnight. There were still moments when my parents defaulted to their old behaviors, focusing disproportionately on Jake's challenges or taking my successes for granted. The difference was that I now had the tools and confidence to address these moments directly. When Dad spent an entire phone call discussing Jake's struggles with organic chemistry without asking about my recent promotion, I was able to point out the pattern and request that he also show interest in my life. More importantly, I no longer needed their validation to confirm my worth. My sense of self was grounded in my own achievements, values, and relationships, rather than in their approval or attention. This shift in my own foundation changed everything about our family dynamic. When I didn't need their recognition to feel valuable, I could engage with them from a position of strength rather than neediness. When their approval wasn't essential to my well-being, I could set boundaries that protected my emotional health without feeling guilty or selfish. 18 months after Dad's cancer diagnosis, I received news that would provide the ultimate vindication for every choice I had made. I was selected to receive the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers, the highest honor bestowed by the United States government on science and engineering professionals in the early stages of their careers. The selection was based on my innovative work in neural interface technology and my commitment to developing accessible medical devices for underserved populations. The award ceremony would take place at the White House, with the president personally presenting the honor to recipients. When I called to tell my parents about the award, Dad started crying on the phone. He said he couldn't believe his daughter was going to meet the president and be recognized at the White House for her contributions to science. He said he was more proud of me than he had ever been of anyone or anything in his entire life. Mom immediately started planning to attend the ceremony in Washington, D.C. She said wild horses couldn't keep her away from watching me receive an award from the President of the United States. The ceremony was everything I could have hoped for and more. I stood in the East Room of the White House wearing my best dress and received a crystal award from the President while my parents beamed from the audience. The citation read in part, "For groundbreaking innovations in neural interface technology and unwavering commitment to developing life-changing medical devices for pediatric patients." After the ceremony, my parents couldn't stop talking about how proud they were, how impressed they were with my accomplishments, how amazed they were that their daughter was working on technology that would help children walk again. Dad said he wished he could go back and attend every academic competition I had ever participated in. He said he finally understood that what I had been doing all those years was just as important and impressive as anything Jake had achieved on a baseball field. That evening, as we had dinner at a restaurant near the White House, I realized that I had finally received everything I had ever wanted from my parents: their recognition, their pride, their understanding of my worth and capabilities. But I also realized that receiving their validation now felt different than it would have 10 years earlier, or even 2 years earlier. Because I had learned to value myself independently of their approval, their recognition was a wonderful addition to my life, rather than a necessary component of my self-worth. I no longer needed my parents to see my value for me to know I was valuable. I no longer needed their attendance at my achievements for those achievements to feel meaningful. I no longer needed their approval to pursue my goals or make my choices. This independence had paradoxically made it possible for us to have a healthier relationship. When I didn't need their validation, I could enjoy it without becoming dependent on it. When I didn't need their understanding, I could appreciate it without becoming resentful when it was imperfect. Today, 3 years later, our family relationships have continued to evolve and improve. Jake graduated from college with honors and is now working as an athletic director for a middle school while pursuing his master's degree in education. He's in a serious relationship with a wonderful woman who shares his passion for working with young athletes. My parents attend Jake's school events when possible, but they also attend my professional presentations, conference speeches, and award ceremonies. They ask equally thoughtful questions about both of our careers and relationships. They've learned to celebrate our different types of achievements with equal enthusiasm. More importantly, they've learned to see me as a complete person rather than just the capable daughter who didn't need support. They've learned to offer encouragement and interest even when I'm succeeding, and to provide emotional support when I'm facing challenges. I've learned to ask for what I need from them rather than suffering in silence and building resentment. I've learned to set boundaries that protect my well-being while still maintaining loving relationships. I've learned that healing family relationships requires both parties to change, and that sometimes that healing takes years of consistent effort. My work continues to flourish in ways that validate every choice I've made. Our neural interface technology has now been successfully implanted in 12 pediatric patients, giving children with spinal cord injuries the ability to control prosthetic limbs with their thoughts. I've been promoted to department director and am leading a team of 15 engineers working on the next generation of the technology. I've also used my experience to mentor other young women in STEM fields who are struggling with family dynamics that don't support their academic and professional aspirations. I speak regularly at conferences about the importance of recognizing and nurturing all types of talents and achievements, not just the ones that are most visible or traditional. My relationship with my boyfriend has progressed to engagement, and we're planning a wedding for next spring. My parents are actively involved in the planning process and have offered to contribute financially in ways they never did for my education. While I appreciate their generosity, I don't need their financial support the way I once needed their emotional support. The most important lesson I've learned from this entire experience is that your worth is not determined by other people's ability to recognize it. Your achievements are not less meaningful because they weren't witnessed or celebrated by the people you hoped would care. Your success is not contingent on your family's approval or understanding. I spent too many years seeking validation from people who were incapable of providing it, while dismissing validation from people who could see my worth clearly. I spent too much energy trying to force my parents to value my achievements, while ignoring colleagues and mentors who already valued them. The breakthrough came when I stopped trying to convince other people of my worth and started living in alignment with my own values and goals. When I stopped seeking external validation for my choices and started making choices based on my own judgment and aspirations. This doesn't mean cutting off relationships with people who don't appreciate you. It means building your sense of self on a foundation that doesn't require their approval, so that you can engage with them from a position of strength rather than neediness. For those of you who are struggling with similar family dynamics, I want you to know that your achievements matter whether or not your family recognizes them. Your talents are valuable whether or not your family nurtures them. Your dreams are worth pursuing whether or not your family supports them. You cannot force other people to see your worth, but you can stop allowing their blindness to convince you that you're worthless. You cannot make other people prioritize your needs, but you can stop sacrificing your own well-being to accommodate their inability to care for you properly. The families we're born into shape us, but they don't define us. The love and recognition we receive in childhood influences us, but it doesn't determine our capacity for success or happiness. The support we get from our parents matters, but it's not the only source of strength available to us. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the permission to succeed without permission. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling their dysfunction by pretending it doesn't hurt you. Building healthy boundaries isn't about punishing people for their limitations. It's about protecting yourself from the damage those limitations can cause, while leaving room for relationships to grow and change over time. My parents were able to change because I stopped accepting their old patterns and created space for new ones to emerge. But even if they hadn't changed, I would have been healthier for establishing boundaries around what I was willing to accept. Your family relationships are important, but they're not more important than your own well-being. Your parents' approval is valuable, but it's not more valuable than your own self-respect. Your siblings' needs matter, but they don't matter more than your own. You deserve to be seen, celebrated, and supported for who you are and what you've accomplished. If your family can't provide that recognition, find it elsewhere while keeping your heart open to the possibility that they might learn to do better. But don't wait for their approval to start living the life you want. Don't postpone your dreams until they understand their value. Don't dim your light to make others more comfortable with their own darkness. Shine as brightly as you can, celebrate your own achievements, and surround yourself with people who can see your worth clearly. The right people will appreciate your brilliance. The wrong people's inability to see it says nothing about you and everything about them. If this story resonated with you, if you've experienced similar family dynamics, I'd love to hear about your journey in the comments below. How did you learn to value yourself independently of your family's recognition? What boundaries have you had to set to protect your own well-being? What achievements are you proud of that maybe didn't get the celebration they deserved? Your experiences matter, your struggles are valid, and your successes are worth celebrating whether or not anyone else understands their significance. Let's build a community where all achievements are recognized and all dreams are supported, regardless of how traditional or visible they might be. Remember to subscribe if this story helped you feel less alone in your own family struggles, and hit the notification bell to hear more stories about building healthy relationships and thriving despite difficult circumstances. Your worth isn't up for debate, and neither is your right to be treated with respect and consideration by the people who claim to love you.